Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining this morning, this afternoon, this evening, wherever you happen to be. My name is John Gershman. I'm one of the co-directors of the New York Southeast Asia Network, and it's our absolute pleasure to have Merlyna Lim joining us today to talk about her new book, Social Media and Politics in Southeast Asia, that is out with Cambridge in their Elements series in politics and society in Southeast Asia. Um, we notice people are still joining, but we would like to respect the time of folks who've and joined us on time. A brief introduction for Merlina, then we're going to turn it over to her, and then we'll have a Q&A with folks afterwards. Since we're running this as a meeting and not as a webinar, I'll just if people can raise their virtual hands, um, that would be great. Or if you prefer to put questions into the chat, and I will throw them to Merlina. So Merlina is a Canada Research Chair in Digital Media and Global Network Society within the School of Journalism and Communication at Carleton University. A founder and director of the Aligned Media Lab, her research interests revolve around the mutual shaping of technology and society and the political culture of technology, especially digital media and information technology, in relation to issues of justice, democracy, and civic participatory engagement. Among her publications, she has a raft of journal articles that I won't name all of them, but her other publications include Roots in Routers, Communication and Media of Contemporary Social Movements, and Online Collective Action, Dynamics of the Crowds in Social Media. So without further ado, we'll turn it over to Merlina.
Sorry, Merlina, can you unmute?
Oh, yeah. Hi.
Oh.
Sorry. Hi there. Hello, everybody. Thank you, John, for the introduction and also for inviting me and Emily for all the assistance and all of you who are coming from, I notice people are coming from different time zone. So I will share my slideshow, but basically I think the big things that became sort of like the origin of my book was that my frustration with some kind of a very moment driven kind of views that people make assumption about social media, whether it's democratizing, autocratizing, based what they see on moment, a case study, right? Certain moment. We have to real and also very like, for example, terrorists scholar doing terrorism has always been arguing about the negative side, right? The radicalizing or etc., since the internet was born, right? While scholars studying social movement argue otherwise. The problem is, of course, there is a sort of like epistemological problem here, because if you look more deeply, right, and then longitudinally, I noticed here is Sydney Jones, he's doing research longitudinally, right? So we actually understand better. And I think I'm in the field for a while now, and I have sort of long view. But my view about internet not necessarily changed, but except that over time, after doing research for 20 years, over 20 years, I noticed there are certain patterns that become more prominent, and there are certain things that more amplified, which is the function of time. And I think power, right? My interest is really about power relation and how what we see back then, basically things probably seem more equal. That was not the function of democratizing force or inherent nature of digital network, but mostly the function of time. Anyway, so I will share my windows. Okay. Oh, okay. So, and one thing that is actually big in the book and become kind of ways of thinking, way of framing, is the relationship between affect and algorithm. So here it is, right? So when some of you probably like cats, right? And you see like, oh, cute cats. And suddenly you like the cat, orange cat, wild cat, and suddenly you see cat playing piano, right? Because you also like music, and then suddenly there is a Persian cat, right? Conducting the orchestra, something like that, because the algorithm thinks you like the Persian cat, and suddenly Persian carpets show up, Persian rugs could show up, right? Because there is Persian here. And then you end up watching really long Persian rug cleaning ASMR, right? And you think like, what the heck am I doing, right? So algorithm, none of this is rational because algorithm doesn't work based on rationality, but also because we don't. It's not only because merely algorithm, but also because we engage with any content without thinking too much. What is prominent here, the currency of our transaction, whether our information consumption, our interaction with other, is affect. Affect is the currency. And that's very important because if affect, algorithm, and affect, this dynamic became the basis of our transaction, circulation of content, our communication with each other. It also means that's the way we engage with politics, because politics show up in our feed not by itself. It show up with Netflix recommendation. It show up in the conversation about some latest gossip, some meme, some funny story, and etc. etc. So that's sort of like, that's my entry point. It will not work to think about social media whether it is, oh, does it meet all this quality of public sphere? I mean, you could ask that question. But to really understand political engagement is to understand effective engagement within social media. So it is the book. Those of you who were lucky to download before, no, it's no longer free, but it was free until 17. So I hope you managed to download it before. You know that it's a very concise book. It was very hard to write because I could easily wrote 300, 500 pages. I had to condense into such a short book. But with that, I was trying my best to sort of like be, to also look at countries that were less discussed, because I think it's important. It's not, we call it Southeast Asia and we neglect Timor-Leste and Brunei, right? It wasn't deep. It was very hard to find the data, but I was trying, and I really hope that I did justice to the region. And I specifically look at two types of politics, which is social movement activism, and the other one was electoral politics, because those two are the most prominent types of political forms, collective political form that where social media were utilized heavily. So in today's declining democracy, social media has become a contested battleground where undemocratic actors use algorithm, AI, and disinformation tools to advance anti-democratic agendas. So in the last 5 years, scholar has described it as a disinformation order, information disorder, epistemic crisis, post-truth politics. Some, actually many, argue that social media has shifted from a tool for democracy to the one that destabilizes it. While this view reflects a recent political trend, I argue that it oversimplifies the role of social media by depicting it as a separate entity that merely exacerbates real-world politics. It also overlooks the contradictory nature of platform politics, especially in Southeast Asia. Yes, political leader may exploit social media disinformation to manipulate, but we also witness vibrant grassroots movement. In 2021 alone, there were over 8,700 protests occur, mainly driven by youth-led dissent in Thailand, Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Myanmar, right? And so also, basically, like I said earlier, even in the era of in static internet, progressive and regressive politics already happening. We might look differently, or I think like certain cases probably become more prominent in the beginning of early internets, or at the beginning of social media, but that's not necessarily explain. That doesn't necessarily justify that social media was once democratic and then became non-democratic. So before I contextualize my analysis, right, in my book, it is mostly in the chapter 4 and 5. Let me start by outlining my conceptual framework, which is largely in the introduction. So let me begin by stating that the belief that social media has transitioned from democratizing to autocratizing, or from public sphere to one of disinformation, I think it's based on flawed assumption. So first, on the assumption that digital networks are correlational with democracy. Like I said earlier, it's important to clarify that digital technology, even the early days, was never genuinely democratic. There were fewer users and fewer content, but it was still far from equal playing field. But just like all kind of network, at the beginning, it looks like it gives an illusion of egalitarian because everybody just started. So we are more on equal ground. Digital networks are far from egalitarian. They operate as I borrow from Barabasi, a mathematical model, which is scale-free networks, which follow a power law distribution. This means that new connection tends to cluster around already popular nodes. Essentially, it's a rich get richer type of networks. And studies indicate that over time, for example, studies by Matthew Heinemann, 2008, 2018, a few dominant players and intellectual users have come to control much of digital media, making it incredibly difficult for smaller entities to gain traction as it gets bigger. At the beginning, of course, the rich and the poor looked like they were more the equal ground because nobody knew how to deal with this, right? By 2024, which is end of 2023, that's where my research for the book ended. Social media network had become more unequal than ever, with which powerful forces, authoritarian government in South Asia, for example, and some very financially powerful political actors and groups in Southeast Asia, they have much more exponentially grew their power. Furthermore, digital and social media have consistently been used to pursue both democratic and undemocratic objectives. Groups from all sides, with people of disrupted, has harnessed the platform to further their own agenda. So, this reality speaks to the second flawed assumption. but that social media was democratizing the public sphere. So I don't think it is productive to continue questioning that, right? Whether it is fulfilling. Yes, it is possible to craft, to create some kind of sphere that is more democratic than others, but the platform themselves, they were not created, they were not designed for communicative, rational discourse, which is very important in the formation of public sphere. So first, this platform operate, they were not at design matter, materiality, or technology matter. Like gun was designed to kill, therefore it's easier to kill with gun. And pencil was designed to write, to draw, right? So it's harder to kill with pencil. It's very hard to draw with gun. So this platform, they operate within the framework of platform capitalism and communicative capitalism, where the primary focus is on data monetization and market control. While they are not, I'm not arguing they are anti-democratic. What they are not inherently anti-democratic. Their core purpose is rooted in marketing logic, not civic participation. So as a result, they influence political dynamic through a commercial rather than democratic lens. So the social media landscape reflect what I call algorithmic marketing culture, namely the interdependent interaction between algorithms and marketing strategy. They shape circulation, content circulation, visibility, and popularity. So at its heart, it is about branding, where with success determined by effective impact of the content. And over the past decades, platform has increasingly relied on algorithm design to maximize user growth and advertising revenue through machine learning and advanced sorting methods. This algorithm analyze user behavior to curate and prioritize content. By capitalizing on emotional responses such as like and share, they push emotionally charged content to drive engagement, embodying an economic of attention and economic of emotion. Simultaneously, in an environment flooded with content and short attention span, social media foster an economic of attention. So in this context, affect become the currency of political communication, political interaction, political messaging, campaign craft narratives laden with emotion, recognizing and that love and hate fuel, shares, and virality. So this focus on emotional appeal shape political discourse from nuanced discussion to sensationalized content dominated by clickbait and viral memes. So it also means that it's encourage and amplify a kind of political message, right, that come from extreme polars, alt-right, right, to be very illustrative, right? Having said that, I'm jumping to the next concept. But I'm not really suggesting that users are just passive victims trapped in filter bubble. Oh, we're in a bubble, trapped by algorithm and ideological echo chambers. And in fact, is in Southeast Asia, people making friends with people who are ideologically different. So I propose that effective interaction and co-agency with its user and algorithms give rise to what I call algorithmic enclaves. These are discursive arena where individuals afforded by their constant interaction with algorithms and with each other come together and collectivize based on a perceived shared identity to defend their beliefs and protect the resources from both real and perceived threat, usually framed around a common enemy. These enclaves are built around shared affect, emotion rather than interest, making them fertile ground for disinformation. This is particularly true in the environment marked by binary politics, where choices are framed as polarized opposite. And Southeast Asia is all binary politics. You could have many parties, like in Indonesia, for example, and yet or Malaysia, and yet you still have just two. In the end, you have like sort of like kind of two choices. And when there are three, it's still two, it's still binary, pro and anti, right? It could be three candidates like a recent election, but it is still framed within sort of like people choose based on pro or anti. And so this division is further fueled by the rise of algorithmic politics, the manipulation of issues through algorithm, primarily aims at dominating media spheres and shaping public opinion. So with this conceptual framework in mind, let's now turn our attention to Southeast Asia. This region is a digitally connected region, home to 680 million, very urbanized, 75% are online, higher than global percentage. There are more mobile phone than people, right? Basically, due to multiple subscriptions per person. And this is like 81%. That's quite high, really high. Over 19 are actually active on social media. So social media rapid digitalization. This is the statistic you actually, these are from the books. Look at exponential growth, 160% in Vietnam. Like, whoa, right? Even places like Laos, still not low, right? Just very quickly, you have Amanda. So this Asia rapid digitalization and high connectivity have turned it into a marketplace for algorithmic marketing, primarily driven by economic interests. With much of population online, the line between offline and online experiences is increasingly blurred. Social media merge personal, social, and political arenas, making politics a recurrent yet transient elements, coexisting with other type of contents. Cat photos, meme updates from friends. However, in this region where internet freedom is restricted, this is the paradox, right? Government often exercise tight control, especially in nation facing autocratization. So the interplay between autocratization, rising disinformation, and growing polarization, notably evident in social media, reinforce each other in this nation. So these techno-political and algorithmic dynamic are reflected in political landscape in the region. And also, I think all of these techno, social, and political arrangement around social media politics in Southeast Asia treat citizens more like consumer or even fans. We are not talking about population who actually have a long history of exercising their rights as citizen anyway, right? And here, when you have this space to engage with politics, citizens engage with them as consumer because they are mediated with algorithms and platform capitalism. And the communication and political engagement is not about rationality, but it is effective based on affect. So So in this book, I focus on two forms of politics: grassroots activism and electoral politics. This is just some number. As I mentioned earlier, when it comes to grassroots activism, Southeast Asia has seen a surge of vibrant grassroots activism in recent years. This is just the statistic, and it is all over the countries, including Myanmar, places that is so repressive, Thailand, right? There are countries that are not having that many, but it is not just Indonesia and Philippines. Actually, there are other countries too, right? And you see places like in authoritarian right activism are more prominent in countries in authoritarian contexts such as Myanmar and Thailand, or right campaigns in Vietnam and Cambodia, issue-driven movement like anti-corruption protests dominates Indonesia and the Philippines. And we also see electoral reform movement like Brazil, Malaysia, and the trans-regional solidarity such as Milk Tea Alliance. All of them are incorporate social media in their activism. So at this core, this is the example. But also there are, so at the core of this type of mobilization is the appeal to affect. Yes, they are progressive, but they too actually is about affect, because I think there is we see ascendancy of affective binary framework where binary narratives and rhetoric are employed to cultivate extreme affect, notably rage, right? Rage against the corrupt politician, the rage against military who basically repress citizen in some places. And this approach, this affective, this affect, especially rage, is actually very, very effective as a method for unifying we against them. So after all, politics in all its form revolve around emotion, social movement, right? With various party ideologies and movement mobilizing different emotions and infusing their discourse with specific affective marker. So this affective binary framework can unify the people as victim in progressive activism against perceived injustice. But also it can be easily co-opted to mobilize against others, fueling division by leveraging existing resentments. This approach, portraying individual as victim, can justify action against group seen as common enemy or threat, like in Myanmar, for example, right? Again, Rohingya, in Thailand, yellow shirt, and other countries as well. So in Southeast Asia, this exploitation surfaces in grassroots movement, embracing hyper-nationalism, anti-democracy, and radical right-wing politics. So the story of activism in Southeast Asia highlight the mobilizing affordances of social media and the effectiveness of the effective binary framework in grassroots movement. However, it is very important to distinguish between mobilizing and democratizing. Mobilization is a mechanical process that can align with democratic, autocratic, and other ideology. So just because social media is a good platform to mobilize, social media platform have, although social media platform have enabled mobilization, they were not originally designed to foster democratic discourse or support civic engagement. So as discussed earlier, these platforms are deeply embedded in algorithmic marketing culture. As a result, the mobilizing effect of social media of collecting on collective action is both a product of activist effort and issue relevance, but also an unintended consequence of algorithmic and marketing-driven push for virality. Now on the second one. Now we turn into electoral politics in Southeast Asia. Social media play a crucial role in political communication, which is good if it is done well, but also propaganda, which is not necessarily a positive thing in voter mobilization in electoral politics, but also in shaping and manipulating public opinion to influence policy decisions. So within this context, algorithmic marketing culture and the economic emotion and economic attention give rise to two key phenomenon. First is populist communication style, which embraces emotion and passion as a central element of political persuasion. It fits the extreme effect tendency, right? This approach creates a divide between the elites and the people, appealing to individual emotion while nurturing a collective identity through empathetic and sympathetic connections, ultimately constructing the notion of people. And second is effective fandom politics, which is something I work after in my next kind of like in the ongoing article that I'm currently writing about Indonesian election, presidential election, which is politics that utilize fan-like tactic to shape public images and engage supporter. By leveraging emotional responses, this approach aim to influence voter behavior and political engagement, drawing on techniques from fandom culture to forge strong emotional bond. So this represents a shift toward viewing politics through the lens of celebrity culture and emotional capitalism. For example, core network of pro-Jokowi user exhibit fandom-like behavior, rallying behind him regardless his shifting values, politics, or inconsistency, right? And when Jokowi supported Prabowo, obviously large number of his supporters, okay, no, we support Prabowo, right? So, and those who criticize Jokowi, including progressive activists opposing his controversial policy, are often labeled as Jokowi's haters, creating polarized algorithmic enclave. Similar dynamics are at work in other countries in the region, such as Thailand, Malaysia, and the Philippines. Meanwhile, my recent election in Southeast Asia highlight not only the growing presence of algorithmic politics, but also its escalating impact on electoral outcomes. There are three key trends that characterize these algorithmic practices. Algorithmic politics is the first trend is professionalization of campaigns. So social media campaigns are not highly sophisticated. Actually, I think actually Southeast Asia was ahead of the US because like even in like a lot of tactics, social media tactics that were applied in the last election in the US, they were already practiced in Southeast Asia at least 4 years earlier, right? Social media are highly sophisticated, backed by elite individual and substantial financial investment. Political candidates hire professional consultants who use advanced technology and marketing strategies to amplify social division and secure power. So this industry includes a wide range of services, from political consulting to data analytics, all designed to orchestrate victories through strategic planning and media management. Essentially, the wealthier entities harness social media's mobilizing effect, not democratizing, reflecting the rich get richer dynamic that I discussed early on. And the second is manipulation of public discourse through highly curated campaigns network, which typically revolve around utilize both voluntary and paid networks to create the more organic buzz and share messages on social media. This approach employs cyber troops, bots. In Indonesia, it's called buzzer. In other countries, called keyboard warriors, cyber troopers, social media influencer, and online celebrities, micro celebrities, to manipulate public discourse. So over a decade ago, of course, 2 decades ago, this strategy was common in commercial marketing. But it has now become a cornerstone of political campaigns. In all network of hate and disinformation I research, interestingly, network of voluntary users are much larger than paid ones and bots. So you need just to inject different nodes, right? And then the voluntary one, they think it's real, so they actually participate in the hate disinformation network. And the third is use of disinformation, both disinformation, both negative and positive, has become a prominent feature in political campaigns. It encompasses not only outright falsehood, but also tactics that distort facts. While previous campaigns rely heavily on negative disinformation, usually personal attack, right, and hate speech, we see a rising trend of positive disinformation. And I specifically highlight one type that was based on what we saw in the Philippines and Indonesia, which is algorithmic white branding. I define it as the utilization of digital tools and automated technologies to create a positive image or brand for a political candidate or public figure who has a deeply controversial and problematic record. So this strategy sanitizes their history and reshape the narrative to appeal to younger voters who may not remember their problematic background. So in 2022, for example, Philippine election, Bongbong Marcos employ algorithmic whitewashing to reshape his family controversial history, presenting it as a golden era of peace and progress. His social media presence was strategically curated, featuring upbeat content that softened his public image. Similarly, in Indonesia, Prabowo Subianto rebranded himself as a lovable, chubby grandfather figure, often seen with his pet cat in campaign materials and sharing playful videos. This approach helped distance him from his violent past as a former military general, fostering a more approachable persona. So both candidates lean into a campaigns of positivity, which attracted love in the question mark from devoted fans, followers, much like the adoration between K-pop fans and their idols. So in a sense, what we see here, that algorithmic politics are reshaping the way election and public policies are fought, employing sophisticated strategy that blend technology, marketing, and deep understanding of public emotional landscape. Beyond electoral events, increasingly autocratizing regime and illiberally inclined governments have been leveraging algorithmic politics, the mobilization effects of social media to fortify their position while stifling dissent. So social media in Southeast Asia play a complex role in grassroots activism and democratic reform. While it facilitates organizing and mobilizing against power, its market-driven orientation and affect-driven algorithms can also promote regressive authoritarian agendas. The rise of algorithmic politics, fueled by an effective binary frameworks and algorithmic enclaves, amplify both progressive and authoritarian voices. This platform can foster solidarity, but also intensify polarization. The real, probably the gloomy reality is the rich, right? The autocratic actors that actually emerging, they actually are the rich one. And well, I cannot really predict the future. I think John earlier told me that can you give us a little bit into the future? I mean, the reality is this rich gets richer. We cannot stop them, right? And there is sort of like between platform capitalism tendency and autocratic tendency, which is fueled by capitally heavy, right? I mean, basically fueled by capitals. So they are amplify each other. They are working in synergy, and that's not good for our future, right? The future of democracy. So in social media, the personal and political become deeply intertwined. Social media algorithms blur the line between emotional lives and civic duties, transforming politics into a form of emotional marketing, citizen into consumer and fans. Ultimately, the economic of attention, the economic of emotion and attention shape not just how we consume political content, but also how we feel about it, how we discuss it, and how we vote. Given this reality, social media platforms are not going away anytime soon. Algorithms continue to shape our political landscape while intensifying existing dynamic. Is continuing that as I speak. Key to these processes is effect and the exploitation and manipulation of the effect politically and algorithmically. So the political landscape in Southeast Asia reveals a nuanced dance between technology and power dynamic, between progressive and regressive forces. This ongoing struggle suggests that the future of democracy in Southeast Asia may depend not on the technologies themselves, which obviously will continue to, I think, to capitalize on effect and gonna be siding with the rich, but also on how these tools are wielded by those committed to change. The resilience of those fighting for democratic ideals in the face of algorithmic and political challenges remain crucial in determining the trajectory of Southeast Asian political landscape. Thank you. So that's the end of it.
Great. Thank you so much, Merlyna. You did an amazing job of synthesizing and summarizing this incredibly rich book, and I think it gave people a sense of how much um, substance there is, as you mentioned, in still a relatively small space. So I imagine people have lots of questions for you. Um, and so if people can just go ahead and raise their virtual hand, or if you would prefer to throw questions into the chat, you're welcome to go ahead and do that. Um, and excuse me, what while we're waiting for people to throw up their hands, virtual hands, I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit. You you take pains in the book to highlight both that the kind of networks that we're talking about here are kind of dominated by platform capitalism and by kind of elites actively using these networks as tools of social mobilization and governance. So these are not we do not live in the kind of anarchistic realm of the internet as, pure civic participation and so forth, which was perhaps some of the early vision of the internet. But at the same time, you talk about that people have agency and, that they are not totally imprisoned within these algorithms. And I'm wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on that, where you really see the spaces for agency against what you really highlight is this, you know, really dominant hierarchical forms of power in the internet. What is it about where really is that space of agency?
So thank you, John. I think that's an excellent question. And I've been thinking of it too much, probably. My just it's not a promotion at all, because I think just to motivate myself, my current project is called Network Spaces of Hope versus Despair, which is a kind of project, it's kind of continuation, but I really want to look really on different level, because I think it's national level, global level, doom, right? But hegemony is never totalizing, right? It's never absolute. There is a lot of spaces for resistance. And if you look at the more sort of like locals and translocals level, here is where agency at work. It's not individual agency. I'm not talking about, oh, let's resist algorithm, but it is collective agency, which is going back to the whole rich to get richer networks logic. So you have this rich, like big thing, but think you don't need to be like one big rich nodes in order to create sort of like a more entrenched resistant network. What you need is dense network, right? So alone, any group, any activist group cannot actually win against this domination, capitalistic domination, but also political repression and autocratic forces. However, the networks of multiple progressive algorithmic enclaves who intentionally, so you don't rely on virality all the time. You might need virality, you might need visibility, therefore you need to understand how it works. But I argue in my other monograph, previous one in 2008, the strength of having online activism is to not rely on the ability to mobilize online itself, but to combine it to offline, not just so you could be viral and visible, but for any activist to have agency, activist network, progressive activist network, to have agency to control at what point in their social movement trajectories to be visible or invisible. You need to protect yourself. How about long game, right? Not viral moment, issue, and then you actually never really go deep and go larger because you just spec network with pre-riders. What about network of hopes where activism, actually I see them every time I go to the field in Southeast Asia. They are small, except that there are not enough networks. People like busy with their own agenda, which is fine. But I'm trying to imagine the possibility, and probably I could find one where these networks of activists, people, multiple stakeholder to assert collective agency, to actually almost like hacking, right? From bottom, like from below, and then take time to grow in order to be more resilient without being too tempted to be viral all the time. And just decide at what point, borrowing from social movement theory, sort of like political opportunities after you have mobilized resources to be resilient enough to face the authoritarian forces. So that's what that's a long answer to to your question.
No, so I guess if we could continue the conversation, because it does seem like you're suggesting that there's different political strategies between
Yeah.
one strategy is we should just create our own algorithmic enclaves, right? We should strive for things that, you know, we want, a set of viral hashtags. We want to, build a community around some kind of
Yeah.
viral images, which is saying which arguably is surrendering to the algorithmic logic and just saying,
Yeah.
so we just need our own algorithmic enclaves.
Yeah.
That's the strategy. That could be arguably kind of the reformist strategy. And then you're
Right.
suggesting there's this other kind of more disruptive, like how do you break, like the hacking, right,
Yeah.
analogy,
Yeah.
which is how do you break the algorithm? How do you
Yeah.
break the attention economy or the political economy of the
Or
attention?
to have a like longer conversation, as simple as that, right? Like,
Right.
instead of catering to short attention span and oversimplifying things and memeable. I think probably memeable is important. Certain moment of virality is important, but also the mobilizing is just one aspect of democratizing practices. I think sort of, how about deliberative modes?
Mhm.
What if WhatsApp is used not to spread memeable politics, but political messaging, but to deliberate, for example? During COVID, it's actually happening. People deliberate
Mhm.
under sort of like crisis, trying to do sort of like to create something collectively positive. That is driven by affect as well, right? By care, by fear, right?
Mhm.
By sort of like a sense of humanity. And so I see hopes in that I think it's a spark, little spark.
Mhm.
And I'm curious on where it might go, in the future.
I'm wondering if you could, well, still waiting for folks to weigh in with their own questions. I'm wondering if you could talk about who do you see as kind of some of the most, you mentioned the Marcos, the Bongbong Marcos campaign and Prabowo's campaign. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about who do you see as being the most creative use on the kind of authoritarian side, right? On the elite
Yeah, yeah.
politics side.
So I was surprised when I found out that Prime Minister Hun Sen in Cambodia like spends so much money, right? I mean, like, we're talking about Cambodia. We're not talking about Singapore or a rich country. Spends so much on Meta, like among the largest spender. And actually, it was quite creative,
Mhm.
right? As a sort of like think about unexpectedly creative the way Prime Minister Hun Sen sort of trying to dominate through a kind of creative messaging. And speaking of different generation, because I think he was campaigning for his son, and uh, and I was surprised why we didn't talk about him at all, right? Very little being written about that. I think Indonesia and the Philippines has always been on the sort of like they're pioneering ahead of other countries, uh, uh, not necessarily authoritarian countries, except that I think, but they, uh, in general, whether they're autocratic actors or not, right, is always
Yeah.
ahead.
Mhm.
And the from authoritarian context, this is Thailand. I think Pita Beaver. I think that was quite something, very creative, very refreshing. But having said that, they do all of this actually using populist communication, populist framework, and affective binary framework as well. So there is pattern regardless uh, the nature of their politics. We
Mhm.
have a question from Sydney Jones.
Yeah. How much do you see cross-national learning, such as Proboa using IT advisors from the U.S. Republican Party? And aside from the Milk Tea Alliance, are Cambodians learning from Indonesia or Philippine activists in Thailand?
Yeah. So, thank you for the question, Sydney. I think it's a great question. Yeah, I think there is, while their consultant don't really admit that they learn from each other, I think, in fact, Prabowo campaigns team insisted they didn't. They said they didn't use the same consultant, and but of course, yeah, there are cross-national learning in both progressive and regressive side. The It's not necessarily always borrowing from the US. Actually, yes, it's true that at the beginning, Obama's campaign inspired many leaders and started employing social media consultants. In Indonesia, it started in 2012 with Jokowi and Ahok in Jakarta, obviously 2014. And then Jokowi campaign team became absolutely powerful because they learned from 2012 and 2014, 2019, and have pretty much like everyday kind of trooper. So it's like always on the campaign mode. So Jokowi had became the source of inspiration in for good or bad in all over the 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 region. So while they are not admitting, you see the pattern. That's like Jokowi kind of borrow a lot from Obama, right? And in fact, the graphic from 2014, for example, is so Obama-y, right? And then Trump allow sort of like almost given permission for someone like Duterte to be more using populist communication in a certain mode, right? And that become a new mode. But I don't think like time was is actually the Philippines is actually a little bit ahead of the US. So I think there is sort of like cross national learning. Obviously there are, and there is actually some consultant from the US that are also used by the same campaign team. They didn't admit, but I think they are. And I noticed that on the especially graphic production and video production, you see the influence very American. The Philippines obviously like borrow a lot from the US, and Cambodia also learning from neighboring countries. As for activists are actually they are exchanging. They have formal and informal learning, because for example, places like I was involved in Engage Media for a while, video activism. We see actually we create a place for activists to exchange. There are a lot of workshops in Southeast Asia when it comes to digital learning, digital rights. So it's happening on sort of like more organizational level. So it is true, but also there are a lot of informal exchanges, right? Less so between Philippines and Indonesia on the organic level. For some reason, Indonesia and Philippines just don't talk to each other. But on certain efforts that is on Southeast Asia, there are Philippine and Indonesian and Malaysian who actually exchange sort of learning. What I see though, aside from you said what Milk Tea Alliance is a start of new things, because yes, that one is actually more collaborative. But the newer one right now, the newer activist network, they seems to be more trans-regional. So they really like aware of their being global citizen. They're also using English now as a signage. Like that was not like that 10 years ago, right? Indonesia Gelap recently, which is I'm here and the protests happened here. A lot of signage and a lot of tweets written in English by Gen Z. I think that's actually helped. I saw sort of like there is a cross communication culturally as well that's reflected among the new generation, and that's also have influence on activism, cross-national learning as well.
Sydney, did you have a follow-up question to that? Feel free
No,
to.
that was very helpful. Thank you.
Just conscious of our time a little bit, and so I'm wondering if you could do a little bit more crystal ball gazing, and kind of projecting kind of things forward. It's at one level, if the dominant trends of evolution are really the platform capital and kind of authoritarian side, um, and that social media is not, at least to date, outside of like the COVID period, has not demonstrated itself to be primarily an effective domain of deliberation, right? That it's really a mobilizational thing. That kind of looking forward, there's like, in terms of different scenarios, there seems to be like a dystopian scenario, which is, you know, platform capitalism and kind of surveillance and authoritarianism kind of dominate, with maybe some isolated pockets of kind of more substantial kind of civic engagement and so forth. Um, and with the rise, as you detail in the book, the recent rise of TikTok as a platform of increasing importance and so forth, just curious where, if you had to make a prediction 10 years from now when we bring you back to talk about your next book, kind of where kind of in Southeast Asia you see this kind of evolving. Is it just going to be continuing fragmentation and so forth in these algorithmic enclaves, or and kind of just the dominance of platform capitalism, or where do you really see things moving forward? Because as you note, Southeast Asia is in many ways, because people are more online than the rest of the world, looks a little bit different than OECD countries in terms of the people's embeddedness in social media.
Uh, so 20 years ago when I wrote my dissertation, I decided not to side with either dystopian or utopian scholars because I think that's not the way to go. And I'm not going to start now. Having said that, though, I do follow the way platforms, corporation, right? Like especially Meta and X and Google. And it is very concerning because a kind of like decision they make. For example, Meta now remove the uh, moderators, right? And then give everything to community, right? Community, which is, I think, let's make the platform to be easily co-opted by the interests of some, right? Because there is no wisdom of the crowd, right? They already decide what kind of voice to amplify. So they actually take side with the sort of like extreme type of group who rely on extreme effect. And that's concerning because it also means that they don't care about making it a better place for engagement. So in that regard, I could make prediction that over time, it will be more hostile place for those who truly want to use the platform to engage publicly, right? Publicly. However, social media is not merely just public-facing platform. What is, I think, less utilized is going back to the deliberative form of politics that is very important, which I haven't started my my road tour to other country. I'm still in Indonesia. We'll start in April, going to other places. It's very gloomy. The activists. Having said that, though, everybody seems to be sort of like they desire to do something together, which I think we learned from the history that, you know, when everybody agree that this is hegemonic, right? I'm actually hopeful about a kind of more unified. And we see this among the young people right now. And I see an attempts to be more than just some hashtag and then a kind of conversation coming. It's too early to say, but the the most dangerous point in the history, I think, when people don't feel anything is wrong, right? And in Southeast Asia, that is not the case now. Actually, people finally realize, especially Indonesian with recent election, that no, we are actually having problem. And also the Trump effect, right? The budget cuts, so the US aid is gone. And in Indonesia right now, I'm going around university, they're facing budget cut because of the allocation of resource to other place. It is dramatic. Like, and I think it's a people also facing, I think it's almost like repression on all levels, right? But also this whole crisis, I think financially crisis in many places that are where critical thinkers are gathered. Hopefully, right now people are still confused on what to do. Hopefully create a kind of sort of like new efforts, the more unified one. I know friends and colleagues in the Philippines are really frustrated right now because it's so difficult, right? It's so difficult for university scholars, for journalists, for activists, and you know, we are talking about arrest, draconian law. I mean, like Southeast Asia is the most repressed region when it comes to freedom of speech, and so it is the culmination of at least the last 10 years. And I cannot predict that it will happen, but I think there are already connection people make, and also we have climate change, right? Which is another type of crisis, I think, that we suddenly have to deal with that. So all of these crises are not good for us, but it might be good for the rise of consciousness. And social media is actually the semi-public and private part of it would be good for the liberation and to consolidate, to take time to be connected to each other. Cheap way to do it, right? And trying to strategize against the digital repression, digital authoritarianism that is unavoidable. Not really a prediction per se, because I'm kind of I refuse to do that.
Totally fair. Before we close out, I was just wondering if you could talk before the webinar, you were mentioning a couple of pieces that you have coming out later this year, one in the journal Indonesia and the other a book chapter and a book on algorithmic urbanism. Wondering if you could just give a brief overview for things that people might keep their eyes out for.
Okay, so yeah, I have a couple things coming out. The earlier, the one that is really ready, I think is probably I just have to deal it in print, is in your heart we unite and divide. Effective sociality, scalable effective sociality, algorithms and politics in Indonesia, which basically, if you understand Indonesian, curhat is a mode of verbal mode, I think usually verbal in the past, but now become a written mode of pouring your heart out. Very effective kind of communication, and I argue to understand political communication in Indonesia, you need to understand curhat. So that's my argument, basically. And another one is looking at is title. I'm opening the file. Automated Utopia, Forgotten People, Algorithmic Urban Imaginary and New Cities in Southeast Asia. My co-author Rita Padawangi and we look at 3 kind of future city. So Forest City, New Clark City, Forest City in Johor Bahru, New Clark City in Manila, and IKN, the new capital of Indonesia. Look at how the new imagination or urbanism is pretty much shaped by algorithmic mode, both by deployment of algorithmic images and narratives of smartness and artificial intelligence base, and also the mode of disseminating it through algorithmic marketing culture that I'm talking about. I think that shape the way we see how the government, but also corporate market new type of urbanism and new city. So that's my incoming publication. And as typically, I typically try to make all of my publication as free as possible. Most of my publication downloadable in my website, and so, or at least you will get the link to download it. So, yeah.
Great. Yeah, so we put the link in the chat as Merlyna mentioned at the beginning. The book was available as a free download on Cambridge's website up through February 17th, but no longer, but should be at libraries near you if you're looking to get a hold of it. And I also just want to flag people interested in upcoming events. And if you're interested in sharing the video for this, this will be posted, the recording will be posted on the NYSEAN website, which is also there in the chat, www.nysean.org. And people should feel free to sign up for our newsletter and hear about other events hosted by NYSEAN and our partner organizations. So one last time, Merlyna, thank you so much for taking your Monday evening with us. Really appreciated the time. The book is lovely, an incredibly valuable contribution at this moment. And we will come back in 10 years and check specifically with you on your non-prediction predictions. But we would love to have you back to talk about some of your other work. Thanks again so much, and thanks everyone for joining us today.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Emily, and thank you, everybody. It's a